In the most outstanding finals performance in all of history, Korean underdogs DRX showed an absolutely amazing performance, starting off in the play-in stage and really heating up all the way to the finals. They led a masterclass in playing to their style and personality, all while constantly adapting to the meta with picks that they felt were good. They executed on their game plans with grace and facilitated that with a drafting plan that even left a team as strong as T1 in for a loop. I want to use this video as a chance to honor the intellect and strategical warfare that was this series and briefly take you through a journey as to what these teams went through, as well as their thought processes as the series progressed. As always, if you enjoyed content like this, feel free to drop a sub to support the channel. Let's hop in the draft. Let's kick things off with Game 1. As the opening game to the most important series these two teams will basically ever play, it's pretty safe to assume that this is the game where both teams come in with the most amount of planning and strategy. Combine that with the fact that the post-group stage meta has been pretty much solidified a little bit more, this is where T1 seemed the most confident in the way they draft. This is led with an Ashe ban in their first phase, as well as a Varus opener here. Touching quickly on Varus, he's pretty much the final form of the ADC drafting meta that we've seen, and he's also the reason why picks like Ashe have come back up as well. If you recall from the group stage, most teams were actually favoring Aphelios as the AD carry of choice, but Varus has quietly shot up in win rate and actually has very few poor matchups right now. He's always been a very annoying AD carry to deal with when he's good as well, because he carries a deadly mix of a strong matchup spread as well as the ability to flex his build for front to back or poke scenarios. This is why when he is in fact good, he'll very often just be picked in a B1 slot. It also helps that he has a great matchup into the Aphelios, so naturally his priority will be higher. A very defining part of the drafts this series was T1's relatively firm belief of their ability to abuse Aatrox, leveraging the weaker game pace in the early game for DRX and picking specific matchups that allow T1 to both take advantage of that and enable Zeus to stretch his legs. This is why you see it given up this game, as well as the Viego in the R1, R2. This is the most prepared T1 seemed here, where they first bust out the Yone pick for Zeus so he can get things started. Previously in the meta, we've seen a lot of compositions be able to counter the Yone since it reveals the forward style for T1's comp, and DRX do take advantage of that here with the signature Heimerdinger pick on R4. This leaves T1 with a very confused Lee Sin pick, who effectively has no identity in this draft. This draft is mainly lost due to the Sivir pick, however, in R5 for DRX, which aims to blow up waves with Heimer and guarantee pressure for early objectives in spite of a poor matchup, but is offset by the fact of the Sivir herself just bringing too little to the table. This draft is pretty much defined by T1 allocating enough resources into the early Varus pick, giving themselves good matchups on both sides of the map, and then DRX simply not giving themselves enough room to do anything about it. DRX definitely pick up the slack in Game 2 here, as this is their first chance to get on blue side themselves. Note that DRX are pretty specific in their bans here. They ban Lucian on blue side here, along with Ryze and Renata. It reflects a very distinct blue side strategy that is tailored to enabling how DRX want to play. Clearly they reveal here that they don't want to play with a Lucian Nami laning dynamic and instead opted for the Varus opener themselves. T1 swing for the Ashe matchup here, which is solid, and pull out the Lux in R3, which I assume is their take on a counter for the Heimerdinger. Although I am a fan of the innovation here, with fragile or narrowed picks like the Lux, you have to treat these situations with extra care, as you have to understand that you are revealing a huge portion of the identity of your composition, especially when you're going to pick generalist champions in your remaining slots like this. There's generally more inherent value here in picking those champions in the R3 slot instead, and then minimizing the enemy's ability to abuse picks like this Lux. Ashe Lux can be a great combo, and conceptually I can see it succeeding, but this is basically the signal for DRX to play more forward here, as T1's eventual comp has no answers to the engage tools that are available. T1 can circumvent this by drafting a little bit more frontline, but they also want to prioritize a winning jungle matchup, so the true solution here is to just do something like pick the Graves in R3 instead, and then hold the Lux pick for as long as possible. Even though they piloted this pick amazingly well, the comp that this draft was built around was just a little bit rough around the edges, and for this reason it ended up being pretty hard for T1 to play. Now let's move on to Game 3. DRX have pretty much evened out the stakes here, and T1 ought to go for blue side once more for their side selection. The beginning of the draft is very similar to Game 1, as the Varus opener comes out. Knowing what didn't work last time in Game 1, DRX instead opt for a different style this time, with the Kalista Renata pick in the R1, R2. Whenever you involve Kalista in the draft, the dynamic gets quite dicey, as the game pretty much becomes about whether she can dominate lane and control the game. I kinda like it in a sense, because it's also a combo that takes advantage of being able to take away the Renata from the Varus, so it puts a dent into that combination. Unfortunately, Varus has a lot of champions he can work pretty well with though, so it's not really an easy battle for DRX to come over. Kalista is also very hard to work with, because it's not hard for teams in this meta to kind of just draft around it. You kind of see this as the draft progresses, as T1 draft was pretty much the impenetrable fortress here. The Varus Karma combination on bot side pretty much nullifies the existence of this Kalista pick, and T1 have a winning jungle matchup to take advantage of that, as well as a tank weak side backwards top lane pick to help enable the strength of this matchup. The only thing to note here is that stylistically, I don't think this makes use of Zeus' talent in the Kingen, but the opportunity here is so great that it's easy to forgive. DRX tried to salvage this with an Ornn R5, but it's simply not enough, as this draft is pretty much a case of a stat check. Well earned by T1. Shifting on to game 4 here, and now with backs against the wall, DRX once again claimed their blue side advantage. In this game, the roles inverse a little bit, as T1 are now the ones that attempt to go for the Callista pick in order to shut down his Varus. That means the same curse applies here, but perhaps T1 were feeling more confident playing this side of the matchup themselves. T1's version of this composition features more frontline, however, with the Sejuani, and is highlighted by strong sidelane champions that hope to utilize their good matchups and really spread DRX's comp thin. I think that this is, however, a case of where, although the comp makes sense in terms of its matchups and whatnot, in terms of providing that room for the comp to actually breathe and function, this is where DRX's comp sort of just came in and stat checked T1. This was, of course, partially due to Kingan overperforming out of his mind here on the Aatrox into Fiora matchup, but DRX's comp is pretty well equipped to sort of ignore the style that T1 is going for, command objectives with a strong team fight formation, and then pretty much ignore the side laning potential of T1's comp. Comps that rely on side lane prowess are very risky because of this fact, and you have to really command a ton of pressure, or else they pretty much are hard to execute. This was the case in DRX's comp, as they just got pretty much every pick they wanted here, resulting in a comp that's just so inherently strong that it doesn't really matter in this case that T1 got good matchups into it. Now on to game 5, and from this point things just get completely unhinged for both teams. The priorities for both teams end up being super wacky here, as we see T1 go for some crazy priorities in draft with a B1 Karma. My only assumption here is that they were thinking so hard and deeply about potential compositional changes with each pick here that they ended up preemptively picking Karma here in order to hedge against a potential Caitlyn pick. You can kind of just feel the confusion here from T1, as DRX actually did ban out the Lux themselves, so T1 couldn't quite get a read as to whether DRX intended on picking out the newly available Caitlyn. However, I don't think they should have had any doubts here, and they would have had more options for themselves if they simply opted for a Varus opener like they've been doing in most drafts. Although the Caitlyn pick comes out, and it does eventually end up being a good lane for T1 anyways, it's just pointless to cut down your options for your composition and lock yourself into a Karma identity so early on. She has great prowess in the early game, but there is flexibility left on the table here, which ended up biting T1 later on in this draft. The Aatrox is also something that should have likely been prioritized more in the first phase for them at this point, as they should have probably caught on to how their idea of finding counters instead of banning it has not really been working. Despite of DRX not even taking the Aatrox themselves in the R1 R2 though, this fumble in the B1 prevents T1 from having enough slots to actually be able to sufficiently counter or capitalize on this opportunity. Imagine that they take Varus in the B1 here, DRX lock Azir Caitlyn in R1 R2, then they can just take Aatrox and Azir in the B2 B3 to get 2 best in slot champions and the best remaining counter pick in the 3rd slot. Because T1 have already committed to the Karma, not only do they not have the champion picks available to really cash in on this opportunity, but they also reveal a really good portion of information about their draft already, giving them really limited flexibility and impacting them later on. This is reflected in DRX's ability to take the Aatrox themselves and gives DRX a chance to shield it with the Yone ban without a response. I understand T1's confusion slightly, since Caitlyn without Lux or Renata in this meta does seem a little bit off, but this is probably because DRX had planned to pretty much use another combination with this Caitlyn in order to achieve a similar effect. We've got things here like Morgana, Thresh, and the Bard that was eventually picked out here. T1 respond with decent picks in the Viego in B4 and an interesting Gwen pick in B5. This pick came out due to T1's lack of success in game 4 with the Fiora, and on paper the Gwen pick makes sense as it still gives a decent lane matchup for Zeus while providing more team fighting prowess than this Fiora instead. In my opinion, however, you probably should not even be putting yourself in the position to require a pick like the Gwen, because this is a champion that's just relatively weak overall in terms of her stats, especially when placed against a stat ball beast that is this Aatrox. Then Pyosik just fully swings it for R5 for the Hecarim pick, in which I believe this is one of the very few compositions where you can actually make use of Hecarim here in the final form of this world's meta. Right now he's in a pretty tough spot because it's not hard for teams to respond and pivot their draft so that he becomes obsolete and has no identity. The catch here though is that the enemy team has no chance to counter it if you pick him in R5. So although this seems a little bit strange on the surface, I think overall this ends up being a pretty fantastic pick, surprisingly enough. Overall, these drafts were the culmination of these two teams' beliefs in the best champions to bring them to the top of the meta, and had some varying strategies based both on what was good, but also what styles they can access based on the players they have. Although both teams had great strengths, it turns out DRX had an overall stronger grasp on this meta and had many unique picks that allowed them to gain leverage and make use of their creativity to net them this championship. I think this was a fantastic series all around, and this was a well-earned victory for DRX, definitely one to go down in history, and it's been defined by the drafts. As always, hope this was insightful to you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay fresh.